Hello there. We're back for another interview with a Criterion stalwart. Today with me is Helen Withers. Hi, Helen.
Hi.
How are you doing?
Good, thanks, Jimmy.
I'm trying not to mention lockdown too much because obviously these videos will be timeless and viewed in 100 years' time. But it's sort of part of it. This very odd 60th anniversary celebration for the Criterion, where we can't really go near the Criterion Theatre currently.
It's been very difficult because I've just realised the last time I was actually in Elsdon, and as you know, I don't live very far away, was the opening night of Love Song, which is over a year ago.
Yeah.
Then I was told I had to shield, and you know, it's the longest I've ever been away, I think.
Yeah, for those future people, there was this pandemic, and we all had to lock ourselves away for a while. Back in the time where we were around, if you're finding this in the time capsule, and yeah, Love Song was the Criterion production that was on at the time, and it opened on the Saturday, and I think on the Monday they announced that everything had to lock down. So,
yes, Steve was with me at the time, and he was doing sound for it. So he spent the afternoon taking phone calls and trying to work out whether they were going to do it or not. I sing on a Monday night in Gareth's choir, and I normally go on 2 buses. And the more phone calls he took, he said, "I don't think you should go to choir tonight, Mum." Yeah. I don't think you. And since then, everything stopped, you know.
Well, you've mentioned Steve and Gareth already. For context of people who don't know you, the Withers family is part of the Criterion legacy going back an awful long time, and your 2 sons, who are now X years old, are both involved as well. I will be interviewing them at some point in the future, and also your husband John, who sadly isn't with us anymore. So I think in this interview we're probably going to cover some of his history as well. So I think first of all, so when did you first get involved with the Criterion?
Late 69. I was teaching English in Foxford at the time, and I had a very good friend there called Anne. And one night she said to me, "Do you fancy coming to see a play?" She had personal reasons for this, which I won't go into, but she needed company that night. And it was a play called Everything in the Garden. And we went to see it at the Criterion. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I ended up sitting in the bar afterwards, and we were joined by a member of the cast called John Burroughs. And before the evening had finished, I laughed a lot with John Burroughs, which is something you always did. And he made me fill in a form to audition for the theatre. So before I left, he'd got hold of the form and that I was going to audition. And in those days, you had to audition for the company. And it was really quite a frightening experience, actually. Of course, Jeff Bennett was in charge, and you had to prepare something. And I've been racking my brain. I can't remember what I prepared, but I know the next stage was you had to read a piece standing on the stage with a member of the board who was sitting on the floor, and that was with Jean Warren. And I read something with Jean. And then I had to do an improvisation as if I were a mother rescuing a child from a burning building. And I can remember that very vividly. And at the end of that, I was told I was a member of the company. And as you know, Jeff's philosophy was, you are a member of the company. That's why you join, and you are expected to turn your hand at wherever your skills will take you, or be prepared to learn new skills, for which I'm grateful, really.
Were you into dramatics beforehand? Had you?
Well, as you know, I'm from Wales, and inevitably because of that, I sang a lot. Okay. And I was in a school where the choir was a very important thing, and we were entered for Eisteddfods every year. So I sang a lot, and I did in university, and I sang. And I was at that point looking probably for a choir to join. I'd done some sort of singing performances on stage and quite enjoyed that. But I hadn't really done acting prior to that. No.
So can you remember what your first impressions were that first night, apart from the fact that you were swept off your feet by John Burroughs to be suddenly a member of the company?
I was impressed by Jeff, and for the 2 reasons. The one I've mentioned, which was you're a member of the company and you do really what it takes to get a play on. And the other was his belief, and it's something I've always tried to do myself subsequently, is that once you join, we try to get you involved straight away. And literally, I think I auditioned in the October, and I was told that I was on props for the next play, which was Reluctant Heroes. And, you know, straight away I was backstage and I was working with Graham Fair and Moira Gatehouse that then was, and people who've become lifelong friends. And then the play after that I was cast in. So I became involved very quickly. So I found it a very forward-looking and friendly place. But I think it was really important you get people involved quickly so they don't feel they're being neglected or you're not interested in them, really. You know.
So is that 50 years, 40 years? My mathematics is terrible when it comes to that. Is that...
How long ago is 1970, Jamie?
Exactly. That's what I'm asking.
50 years.
50 years.
It was the first production I was in was the first production in 1970. Yes, which was Celebration.
And over the years,
it was played by Waterhouse and Hall, you know, the Billy Liar people, and I don't think people know it because it was in two parts. The first half was called The Wedding, and the second half was called The Funeral. And one was directed by Jean Warren, and the other by a very young Jim Conry. And you've heard this story before. It's my first performance, and I was cast as the bride in the first play, and one John Withers was cast as the groom, and that's how we met. Really corny story. And
not corny at all.
And that was January 1970, and we married in October 71, and we were together for 44 years. Yes.
Did John Burroughs force you to do that as well, or was that was your own volition, I imagine?
Pardon, love?
Did John Burroughs force you to do that as well, or was that of your own volition?
No, it was my own volition. Jean Warren always said she engineered this relationship. I think just because that she cast it.
And over the years, you've done an incredible amount of different things at the theatre. It's like some people just act or just do one particular thing. You've done pretty much everything there is to do, I think.
I've done quite a lot. The one thing I haven't done, and to amuses Stephen, is sound, because he's always enjoyed doing sound. And I always think that must be the most nerve-wracking thing you can do, because I'd be terrified of pressing a button at the wrong time. It's silly, isn't it? That other things, but sound, no. I have done lighting. I found early on that I really enjoyed stage management. And quite soon after I joined the theatre, I stage managed a couple of things in the 70s and really loved it. And that's really, I find, a very interesting job, because you're working alongside a director, but you're also working alongside a technical team and you're trying to liaise between them and get the show up and running. And that's something I do enjoy as well.
Yeah, we try and dig down into those sort of things as well, because a lot of people might not understand, you know, what these job roles are. So I think the stage manager is basically the person who runs the show on the night.
Yes, and I think it has changed over the years. I think when I first joined Jamie, the stage manager sort of turned up just before Long Sunday, which is the week before you run. Now you're expected, rightly so, I think, to be in rehearsals early on. I mean, I stage managed The Father for John Rusco relatively recently, and I think I was there nearly every rehearsal, because it's important, I think, as a stage manager to know what the director wants, but also to look at the stage. We had some set changes in that, furniture changes in that, and to know exactly when and how that could be done. And you do know that if you're in rehearsals regularly and you know what the director wants. And then during the run of the show, obviously, you're organising the cast, making sure they're there, queuing in sound and light, making sure the props team are set up, make sure there are no worries about wardrobe or wardrobe malfunctions. And I find it a very interesting job, and because it is very much a job in which you work as a team. And as I say, I enjoyed doing it. I did The Father, and then, as you know, with you a year last December, we were on stage doing It's a Wonderful Life.
Yes, that was a radio play, and the stage manager very unusually actually sat on the stage and stage in view, which normally is a job that you do from the corner or from sort of behind the stage. It must have changed quite a lot as well in terms of the technology.
Yes, it is. But as far as the stage manager is concerned, you're sitting there with a headset, and it's vital that your link is there with the sound and light, voice. And sometimes you're queuing in projections and other things as well. Sometimes you have a sheet in which you have lighting in one colour, sound in another colour, projections in another, follow spot in another. You know, it can be mayhem, but it's good fun, I think.
I think it's terrible.
Yes.
I've done it a couple of times and it's been absolutely terrifying. I think you feel very responsible, like anything you say might just set everything else off wrong.
Well, Stephen, you know, my son enjoys stage managing, but he was in a situation just before lockdown where he had to cue in music for singing, and he cued it and it didn't happen because one of the speakers had broken, and he actually had to pull the curtain on the first night for them to resolve it. And that's a horrible situation for a stage manager to be in. Yeah.
So over the years, a number of years, which are the productions that really stand out for you? Is there any particular roles or things you've been involved with, or indeed things you've seen?
Oh, lots of those things I've enjoyed doing. I mean, very, very early on, I did, the first time we did Oh, What a Lovely War, it was Things About the Second Thing I Did. And quite not long after that, Much Ado, directed by John Burroughs. And those two stood out for me in the 70s because I think they were both largely ensemble pieces. And the Criterion has a great strength on working in ensemble groups. And I actually loved that because you were part of a team, you were part of a group, and you work very closely together. And I love doing both of them. I think as things I've done myself, I don't know. I love doing The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie. You don't often get an opportunity to do something like that. And I absolutely loved doing it. I think the scariest thing about that was Anne, who was directing it, decided, quite rightly as it transpired, just before the Sunday dress rehearsal, to reblock the whole play. You know, blocking is looking at your position on stage, and we've been working to a certain arrangement for 5 weeks, and she couldn't think what was the problem, and it suddenly struck her. So the whole thing was replotted on the Friday before Long Sunday, so the week before. So that was fairly scary. But I loved doing it, and it was a delightful thing to do. And we have a much loved member of the company who again is no longer with us, Jamie, called Louise Bagley, who was from Edinburgh. And my one terror was that I got the accent right. And after the first night, she said, "That was great, Helen. I wouldn't have known that you hadn't come from Edinburgh." Great. Jumped that hurdle, you know, but I love doing it. And other things that have stood out, I mean, you know, the plays that we were involved in, like The Madness of George III. I have, my memory of that is of a lot of laughter, because, you know, those of you who were pages and had other roles, we spent a lot of time laughing, and I think it was very funny for everybody but Keith, who had this very, very difficult role to carry and wasn't allowed to laugh at all, but the rest of us were. And we had this very strange system where John gave us a foreshortened bed, so we were actually sitting on a couch with a big cover over us. So from the audience, it looked as if we were on a bed, but we were very, very cramped. And for some reason, John had me knitting. Yes. I knitted quite a few things doing that. But it was a very, I remember it as a very happy show. And John was in it and Gareth was in it as well. So it was quite nice that we were all part of the same thing, which I really enjoyed. Probably another favourite of mine, which is very, very different from those, was Betrayal, the Pinter. Absolutely loved the play, directed by Anne Woodward. And it was John Hathaway, Paul Glenn and myself. And I thought it was an absolutely fascinating play. Didn't really know Pinter before then, but then you find out how telling every pause is, because every pause has a really, really vivid meaning. And I think all three of us loved working on it. It was unfortunately in the days where we didn't necessarily play to large audiences. I think that we've been very, recent years, our audience has been very high. And I think we played to quite a low audience. But I think we we'll, look back, I feel that's something that I felt I really gave my best shot to, and I absolutely loved it. And I have used it in teaching since, I think.
Is that the smallest audience that you've played to? Can you think of a time? Because yes, recently the Criterion's been very lucky that there's quite a large following, and even the shows that aren't as well known tend to get quite a loyal following, and people will come. But there have been plays years maybe where it's been a bit. I think my record was 11. I think I remember playing.
I don't know if my John was involved in that, and I wish I could remember what the play was. But John was once standing in a curtain call and realised there were more people on stage than there were in the audience, and he was just totally hysterical, and they had to almost carry him off because he was laughing so much. But I think we did something like 40% for Betrayal, which I think nowadays they'd think was quite shocking, but it was sort of well received.
In other times, that would actually be kind of delightful. It's 40% audience.
I think for recent years, I've probably directed more. And again, a bit like stage managing, once I started doing it, I found I absolutely loved it. Again, I think it's the whole team thing, and I suppose it's the teacher in me. You just love watching things develop and change and get better, and you see people come from nowhere and do really good things, and I absolutely loved that. And it was by accident. I was back in about the early 70s. I was down to stage manage Our 11's Death Trap, directed by Graham Fair. And I don't know if you know the play. It's a really good play. It's a really spooky thriller. And when we did the auditions, Graham asked if I'd sit with him on the auditions, which I did. And he couldn't cast the main character, which is the writer of thrillers. And while we were looking at the other people, he said, I don't know who to cast as the writer. And I went, well, the obvious person is you. And he just said, looked me between the eyes and said, I'll play it if you'll direct. And I went, done. I don't think none of us told Jeff Bennett until after we'd had this conversation. And I'm ever so grateful for that, because I found straight away that I loved doing it with, and it's given me the confidence that I don't think if Graham hadn't said that to me, I don't think I'd have had the courage to go up to Jeff and say, I would like to direct. But it was a great experience. And I have a theory that if you are learning as a director, the best thing you should do is cast as well as you can. I mean, I had Graham, who's probably one of our finest actors, playing the lead in that play. And my second production was The Dresser, with John Hathaway and John Rusco playing Sir and Norm, and another great and good of the theatre. And they don't want to fail, so they won't let you fail. And I always think it's a very good way to start directing, actually.
Yeah. Give people the right tools, if for the first go.
Yes, I think so. When you start off, it just gives you that boost. Particularly was The Dresser. It ran in mid 80s, and the last weekend of it, the Criterion was hosting the Little Theatre Guild. So it meant the last night the audience was full of all these delegates, so it was quite worrying. So it was a relief that I'd got Messrs. Hathaway and Rusco to take it off for me, really. Yes.
Ninth Criterion acting fraternity. I'm just going to drop in at this point and say we don't all have fantastic memories, and there'll be a link below the video to the Criterion Archive, which is on our website, which you can actually play along at home by loading up Helen's page, and you'll find links to all of these plays with various pictures and programs and memorabilia. You'll be able to look at the cast and who was involved in the crew, and play along like that.
I think I mentioned sort of the two earliest things. One thing that will stay with me, and I hope may well stay with you too, I became very fascinated by David Edgar's Nicholas Nickleby. And when it was first on, it ran about 10 hours, I think, because it is two plays. It's part one and part two, The Life and Adventures of Nicholas Nickleby. But it was something like 10 hours. But I absolutely loved both plays. And it took me quite a while to persuade Anne, who was our artistic director at the time, to think we could do it. But we could only do it if we did it over 2 weeks, because it was two plays, then we'd have to find a way of doing it over 2 weeks. And if it was heavily cut, and I promised her that I'd try and get it down to between 6 and 7 hours to make two sort of manageable chunks. And that was an interesting experience, because you start by, cutting lines, and then you think, well, do I cut scenes or characters? And then you realize you actually have to take out threads that you think aren't that significant to the story, and as long as you're telling the whole story. So, I mean, cutting it was very interesting. And then Anne said she would direct the second part and I'd do the first. And in the end, it was a great experience to do. But when I look back, I do think how crazy we were, because we did it in September, which meant we were rehearsing through everybody's holiday period. People were coming and going. I mean, it wasn't without its tragedy, because during that time we did, a member of the cast died very suddenly, which was horrendous for all of us. But I think at the end it was a significant achievement for the theatre, the way everybody pulled together. I mean, I think we had a cast of 50 running through both plays.
Yeah, some of them playing the same part, and some of them playing different parts in the different plays.
Yes,
there was a certain amount of. I think I was a first parter. I didn't come back for the second play, and there were other people who were kind of drifting in to replace us. So it was on alternate nights. So we part one and then on the Saturdays, both parts.
Yes, the opening and closing Saturday were both plays, and I can remember, I think it was John Barnes organising picnics. So if you were booked for growth, you could have a picnic in between, which I thought was absolutely great. And I can remember, I think it was the first night when we run both together, the first Saturday, there was so much stamping and cheering at the end. And my John had played Ralph Nickleby, so was understandably exhausted. I mean, for John and for James Claridge, who was playing Nicholas, they went pretty solidly through both plays. So to do both over one day was quite exhausting. And I can remember at the end of that first night, I was on a high. And John just looked at me and said, "Can we go home? I'm exhausted."
We'll be back in there.
So we headed straight home, yes. But it again, I think it was a good thing to do.
It pushed everybody to the very limits, like in every department. The wardrobe was incredible.
Absolutely.
The set itself was sort of the seating arrangements. Normally, we would have a stage and a rake of seats kind of looking at the stage, and for that there were seats all over the place and scaffolding.
And we had a raised platform that ran round, and people could get in from the dressing room, I think, and run around this platform. I mean, it was terrific.
Yeah.
And please look at the photographs of the costume, because the wardrobe I think you were a dashing Italian, weren't you, Jamie?
I was.
Was it Mantalini?
I had a huge beard and ringlets, and then I was someone else as well. I then had to whip the beard off right at the end to be a kind of chorus boy, I think, in the sort of at the end of the first part, which I was in, and there was a lot of glue, a lot of spirit gum, kind of everywhere, all over.
Yes, it was exhausting. I mean, I can remember during the second week, because nearly everybody was working full time as well, so you're coming back after a day's work and then doing these performances, and it ran over 2 weeks rather than our normal one. And during the second week, I felt I needed to go into hiding, because people were absolutely exhausted. And I was like, was this such a good idea? But no, it went down well, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the half hour call is what, 5 to 7.
5 to 7.
So you finish work at 5:30, You click your clock off. You're lucky if you can cram a sandwich down you, and you're on stage by 7:30.
Yes.
It is rather like having two jobs.
Yes, I mean, I think John did say it's all very well for you.
Oh yeah, the director.
by the end of the second week, you just swan along and say hello.
Bye. See you later.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and then more recently, I've seemed to have been involved in things that are adaptations of novels. Well, after the David Edgar, I seem to have got myself into a groove. So what I really did enjoy doing was as a studio piece. You know, every now and then we do studio performances. And the nice thing about studio performances, basically, you've got the floor of the auditorium, you know, and the one I really enjoyed, well, two I've really enjoyed doing, but one was Not About Heroes, which was basically about Wilfred Owen and Siegfried Sassoon. And it went on between two big productions where there were big set bills on stage. So I just had the floor of the auditorium and a couple of chairs and a desk. And it was all that play needed because it was about the lives of these two poets. And I really, really enjoyed working on that with Joe Fallowell and Pete Gillam. And we did take it to the Talisman for a performance a few weeks later as well. And it was really, really enjoyable to do. I quite like the minimalism of just concentrating on the language and the words and the characters, and let's forget about everything else, which you have to do with studio productions. And other than having fun with some music, we were able to do that with that because the language is so wonderful of the Owen and Sassoon poetry. That was really interesting. And then more recently, I've done things like, again, Great Expectations, Dickens again, Kes, the adaptation of Kes. That was lovely because, again, that was a studio piece and it was just a two-hander. And if you don't know that play, it's a wonderful adaptation of the novel in which, you know, one actor plays lots of different characters and then you need a young man to play the boy. That works very well. And we did that as a studio piece as well on the floor of the auditorium. And then more recently, things like Good Like Mr. Tom, and then very recently, The Railway Children. So adaptations of favourite novels I've quite enjoyed doing, if you can get good versions of them.
I remember my father for years, one of his favourite running jokes was that the play he wanted to do at the Criterion was Kes. Because he was just trying to work out how to get the kestrel involved, and he had this idea that it would be, you know, for weeks it would just be in the eaves of the theatre, and there would just be someone standing there trying to attract the bird. So I was very delighted.
Our last moment of the play was the two of them holding up their arm like that, as if waiting for the bird to land. But it is very cleverly written, that adaptation, so you can do it without a bird.
That would have been a wonderful practical joke on the last night, just to actually release a kestrel into the auditorium.
I'm on it.
Don't worry, guys, we've lined your gloves with meat tonight. So,
yes,
and as well as all of the plays, you've also been involved quite heavily with the sort of organisation for a long time. So you have been, I can't even work out the years, running the production committee.
Oh gosh, how long? I was artistic director in the early 90s, and then since then, which, as you know, is a job and a half itself. And I think you have to, as some of us, to give yourself a limited time. I think Jane just recently said, I'll give myself 3 years, and I said the same thing. I'd got 2 boys doing exams in school, and I was working full time at the time. And that's it. As artistic director, as you know, your job is to put together a programme for the year. And you want to make sure that programme is varied, different size casts, different genres of work, giving equal parts to men and women if you can, and plays that directors are fighting to do as well. So just getting that combination of things together is always tricky. I really enjoyed doing that, but I think you have to give yourself a limited time to do it because it can be very demanding. But then since then, yes, I've chaired production committee, I'm sure for far too long. But it is a committee that consists of the heads of department. So head of lighting, sound, set building, props, wardrobe, stage management. and we meet very regularly, normally every 6 weeks. And our task is to make sure that plays are staffed and directors are supported. So when we're running well in normal situations, we like to be about 4 plays ahead of ourselves. So we've got 4 plays manned, staffed with props teams, wardrobes teams. We know usually ahead of that who the set designer is, you know, who your set building team is, and it's to keep all that going. So basically it's to make sure the production is running from the technical side, and that the director has support. So we invite directors into the meeting well in advance of their production, 6 months in advance if we can, so they can say, this is the sort of set I want. You know, is it going to be what we'd call a black box set, which is actually a very simple set, or is it going to be a set involving, you know, something like when I did When We Are Married, we wanted to create a very realistic looking Victorian living room of a prosperous family, and so you have to go into a lot of detail with that, of getting the look right and something like that. Or are you going to perform on stage, or what do you want some performances on the floor, as we were talking about with Nicholas Nickleby performances, and so we'd have a different seating arrangement. So we can do all that planning in advance. And props teams can want to know things like, is there a lot of food served in this play? Have we got to keep cooking, making things? Costume want to know, is this going to be, you know, a piece of Shakespeare set in Tudor times, in which you'll need all the right costumes, as we did, as we were saying with Nicholas Nickleby, or is it going to be a modern dress play where, you know, it's quite simple to dress, so that each team knows well in advance of what the requirements are and can set aside their groups accordingly. And we still have been having meetings in lockdown, and it's been quite nice to be able to sort of continue to plan, as we are at the moment, things later this year. Yes.
And there's usually
but I think it's an important committee, because we sort of see to the, if you like, the background work and the running.
Yeah, I think it's only like the really big behemoth things that kind of get attention early. I mean, I don't know when you first had the conversation about Nicholas Nickleby with these guys, and said, so this is what we're going to need, everything on the set.
Yes. And, you know, and we're going to have a platform running from the wardrobe right down, and the build was, you know, required very skillful people to put up scaffolding for us. Yeah. But that again, as you know, that's part of the artistic director's job. If you're doing something like a Nicholas Nickleby, you try to do a small cast modern dress play before it and after it, so that, you know, a lot of energy is going to go into that one. You know, I mean, recently we did, if you saw it, Pete Bagley's production, Much Ado About Nothing, which was set in World War II, and great costume thing, but again, a largest cast, and you want to make sure that, you know, right, that there's going to be a lot of energy going into that from the wardrobe department. So can we give them an easier time afterwards? You know? Yeah,
I'm just looking at that 2002 run, and that was quite a weird one, because we had 12 Angry Men, which I was involved in, which was invariably 12 Angry Men, 11 Angry Men, 9 Angry Men at times during rehearsals. A lot of
it was super though, Jamie. You did such a good job on that one.
But then we had Geoffrey Bernard is Unwell, which was a small cast, 4 or 5 people, mainly just John, who played Geoffrey Bernard, who was just on stage the entire time. Who then went straight into Nicholas Nickleby afterwards. It's no wonder he was tired.
I didn't realise that till I looked at it. How on earth did I persuade John to go straight from Geoffrey Bernard into playing?
And then it looked like we had a little break, because Burning Issues was quite a low-key play after that. But then Red Hot and Cold was after that, which was another quite big cast, musical,
yes,
big resources. I think that was always my favorite part about artistic director. It's like imagining you've got like 6, 7 or 8 plays in a season, and then you've got a limited amount of resources, and you're sort of moving things around and saying, well, I can't use too many people in there because I'm going to need them there, and they're not going to do 2 or 3.
I mean, that's why you have to be talking about something like a Nicholas Nickleby well in advance.
Yeah.
you can't spring that up. I mean, I think it took me 18 months to talk Anne into it, but I think you need to, so they know that's, all departments know that's coming. Yes. And it's, you know, but I didn't realise, yes, Geoffrey Bernard was so close to it, yeah.
I think, yeah, you see it looming in the distance and think, well, we need to just bear that in mind and not put too many things around that. Yeah. While we're on John, sadly he's no longer with us, but he also had an incredibly, I think, 69 productions.
Yes, I know.
Of which he was in the cast of 62. And Geoffrey Bernard is Unwell is something that I will always remember him for.
I have it written down on a piece of paper in front of me. His egg trick, he just was, I thought he was superb in that. I mean, he'd never in his life drunk so much apple juice. For people who don't know it, Geoffrey Bernard was a drinker, and it was set in a pub, and he was required to drink whiskey, in theory, all the way through and become steadily drunker as he went through. But they decided on apple juice, which he drank a lot all the way through that. But I thought it was a tremendous performance. And there are clips around still which the boys treasure of John from that, which I think is our favourite. And another favourite, of course, which links both our houses, if I can say it, is Educating Rita. When John played Frank and your mum Jean played Rita. And at that time, we didn't live our houses weren't too far apart. That's my phone. Can I switch it off?
We're not on live telly, so I'll do some vamping. We'll talk about something else. I'll tell, just while Helen's dealing with that, I'll tell my other favourite John Withers story, which is when I was very young. I was probably about 8, I think. The Criterion did Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and John played Willy Wonka, and it was one of his favourite jokes around the children to stand up and say, "Did everyone see my Willy Wonka?"
After he died, the boys wanted that printed on something and stuck in the theatre. I think. Now, I mean, I thought John and Jean did a cracking job in Educating Rita, and because our houses weren't too far apart, there was a lot of time of John saying to Jean, "Well, I'll walk you home," and he'd walk up Waterhall Avenue and they'd go through their lines, and then an hour later they'd both turn up at my front door again because they'd walk back because they were going through their lines, pacing the streets of Charlesmore. But I thought it worked very well, and it was cracking. When I did one of my favourite plays, actually, is Timberlake Wharton Baker's Our Country's Good. I think it sort of taps in to my love of theatre and my love of teaching drama, and what over the years seeing what drama can do in building confidence to the least confident students I've taught. I mean, it just is wonderful to see that develop, and Our Country's Good does all that in spades. But he played Captain Philip, and if you don't know Our Country's Good, it requires a lot of doubling. Most of the people play. It's about the first convict ship that went to Australia. And when they got to Australia, rather enlightened officer thought it would be a good idea for the convicts, as well as build their own prison, which they were required to do a performance of the recruiting officer. And so most of the actors involved were playing officers in one scene and convicts in another, which was quite good fun for them to do. And John played the captain, Arthur Phillip, and also John Wisehammer, the man who wrote the famous intro, which was "We left our country for our country's good," which was a very moving moment in the play. And I thought it was the first time I directed him, and I did think, I don't know if this is going to work, but it did, and I found that very moving. And for goodness sake, I'm going to have to put my phone out of the house.
I don't have another anecdote to put in there, although I would say, having discussed earlier about first-time directors, the first time I directed, it was a small play. It was Skylight by David Hare, and John was an absolute rock for me for that. So for someone directing their first play, to have somebody who is just so professional and on it, was an absolute joy. And I worked with him many times as well. I think he invariably, at various points, he married me to people. I think in Romeo and Juliet, he was
Romeo and Juliet, he married you. There's a lovely photograph, isn't there, of that?
yes, yeah. And I think he put me to death in Cause Célèbre as well. I think he
oh gosh, yes,
he had me executed. So a mixed bag.
Yes, but he just, I mean, I directed him in The Crucible, and I can remember, you know, when you're directing, there are certain people, you know, rock solid, you can rely on to be there with their lines learnt, you know. And I can remember in that he was one of my rocks. He was playing Governor Danforth, and you know, I knew once that was running, he would be fine. I think my prime example of John and his sheer meticulousness when it came to learning lines. I mean, he learnt every semicolon and, you know, every comma and pause, and, you know, he was meticulous about learning. And when we did 40 Years On, which was to celebrate our 40th birthday, he was the headmaster, and I was also in the cast, as was Gareth. And our first rehearsal was after Christmas. We'd had a little break after Christmas, and it was our first rehearsal. And it happened to be on my birthday. So that day I'd been running around dealing with family. And we shot down to rehearsal, sat down, and he said, okay, let's start with the headmaster's speech. And the headmaster's speech, to my memory, at the beginning of the play was 5 pages long. And he got on the stage, and he did it without a script. In the first, I said, when did he do that? When did he learn it? It's been Christmas, we've been busy. But he wasn't going to go to a rehearsal without being prepared, and that was John. You know, he wanted to do it. Yeah.
So I've got a question down here that says, has the Criterion made a difference to you in your life? It's hard, I guess, to say no to that when it's been such a long collaboration.
It's so many, you know. Yes, I met John in my first production, and we continued to work at the theatre even after the boys were born. I think because we shared the same hobby, we were able to take it in turns of doing things, so that we kept that link going with the theatre all the way through. And friendships, you know, the friendships that we forged over the years have been fantastic, and none better than this last 12 months, you know, where phone calls from Criterion friends, Zoom meetings with Criterion friends, you know, one being your mum, that we sort of meet up once a week and we'll just sit and chat. You know, in a way, it's got me through the last year, just having those friendships, which have been, you know, go back 40, 50 years, you know, and our children, you know, growing up together as well.
Oh yes, them. I remember them. What do you see for the future? I mean, you know, in the immediate short-term future, it's just going to be nice to get back in the building and see all these 3D people all over again. Have you got any ambitions have you got anything? I mean, don't give away any secrets, but things that you want to do, things you want to see the theatre achieve?
Well, I just want it to be up and running as it was. I mean, I think the last few years we've had really good houses. You know, we've presented a very varied programme, so that people, I hope, maintained the quality of performance and production that, you know, was originally set by Jeff Bennett, and various artistic directors have kept going through the years. And I just want that to continue, really. It needs to be, you know, in the hands of younger people now, and I'm glad to say it is. You know, Keith and I say this can't be in the hand of us oldies anymore, really. If the theatres continue, it's got to be in the hands of young people to see it drive forward. And it's been a very, very difficult year. I mean, we have done things online, and we've kept each other going by doing things through Zoom. We did Edith in the beginning. We did a read of Christmas Carol. We did an Italian straw hat as a celebration. So we have kept ourselves going. We've kept having meetings. We've had some great quizzes, haven't we? Which we've set up, have kept us going over the last few months as well. So the contact is still there. And the sort of, so, you know, the people are still there, and the will is there to get to get things moving. We have a program of 2 plays going into rehearsal. They are rightly small cast plays, so that we can, if necessary, do them via Zoom, but looking now that we're going to be able to open and perform them on stage. And then, the hope is that we can get a program of plays going next year and get back to normal. I would like to direct, but I need to talk to the artistic director about that again.
I mean, I think that
I just want to see it running and being successful and being there and being a central part of Elston. I mean, we have done we've done some interesting things in recent years, like we have links now with the Blind Resources Centre. And a lovely routine we've got into during the run of a play is that Hugh Searle, who manages the Blind Resources Centre, brings a group of partially sighted people to the theatre at late afternoon of the week of the play, where director and some of the cast meet them and let them go on stage, let them walk around the set. I can remember with the Railway Children, it was lovely because 2 of the cast dressed up. Similarly with Handbagged, when we were doing Handbagged, where the central characters are Mrs. Thatcher and the Queen. Your mum dressed up as the Queen and Liz Brooks as Mrs. Thatcher, and were able to come close to them so they could have a look at the costume, the look. With the Railway Children, they were able to walk around the set, get on the platform, get close to things. We bought props for them to handle, and they then would go back to the Blind Resources Centre, the group, have a fish and chips tea, and then come back in the evening and sit in the front row where it's closest to the stage, having had a good hour's chat with cast and director and got very close to the props, costume, so they had a clear understanding of what it was going to be. And that's been a really lovely experience and something I think it was been quite nice to do with the community. And I know Richard Warren has been doing work with them with writing as well. So we established really quite good links with Hugh's group.
Yeah, I think one of the key strengths of the theatre for me is over the years, adapting, trying to open up and be more inclusive and really sort of get out and do stuff in the community. And just change with the times. And I think that's why it's been so interesting during lockdown, where we're unable to do any of the things that we normally do, and yet it's happened. The people have adapted, people have been doing Zoom performances.
We've all had to learn about green screens and lighting and things like that, but that's been great because it's new experience for all of us. And yeah, it's good.
Yeah. Do you have like a fondest memory of the Criterion, either on the stage or around it?
It's really about the families, Jamie. It's about families and friends, and we've had some lovely New Year's Eve and birthday parties. I think we had Gareth's engagement party there, and we've had when people reach milestones like 40s, 50s, they have a party at the Criterion, and it just brings everyone together. And it's those friendships that I suppose are the most important thing. And it's been really sad. Recent years we've said goodbye to some much loved members of the theatre, but although that's been terribly sad, it's lovely to think that the theatre is continuing and the standard is being maintained.
I think a few years ago, it's amazing that the person who had run the bar at the theatre for years and years and years, an amazing lady called Joan Worsley, had her 100th birthday at the theatre. Yes. Sadly has since left us, but it is amazing how long these things span.
And Jeff Bennett came back, and we had a 90th birthday lunch for him at the theatre, which was great. He was the founder, and we were able to celebrate that together as well. It's almost the social things, that I remember. Loved, almost too many to think of loved productions, but yeah, good memories.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I say I'm incredibly excited to be part of this project because I get to speak to all of these people, and hopefully throughout the year we're doing sort of one-on-ones now, but then I'm hoping that we can bring people back for specific talks about like specific productions or specific relationships, or and just talk to everybody and create this great record and archive. Thank you so much for talking.
Okay, thanks, Jamie.
It's been lovely to hear about those memories.
Can you edit out my phone calls?
Absolutely, I can. No, I won't. I will keep them in for the rawness. I told some brilliant belting stories while you're outside, so don't worry. I covered for you, as we always do. Lovely to talk to you. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Jamie.